Good afternoon to everyone. It's Vijay Singh. I work for UNDP as a policy advisor. Thanks FAO and UNDP colleagues who has been who has been helping us to manage the SCALA program. I think Neha's presentation has set the scene for the work that we have been doing in the country offices or in the country for value chain. So the current presentation that I'm going to make it is basically about the study that we have done on selected agriculture value chains and trying to see the impact of the value chain. It was a very complex study. It was a very complicated study as well because it was never done before. Nepal has done several studies on value chain, but it was never looked at from the perspective of climate change. So it was also from the methodological perspective, it was a big challenge, but I'm happy that we have been able to successfully conclude it. Just setting the context, because we are talking about the climate. So Nepal is highly vulnerable to climate impacts, particularly the temperature increase and the average rate of precipitation is impacting particularly the agriculture sector. So it is agriculture, and through the agriculture, it is the food security which is highly impacted. The overall objective of this study was to fulfill the knowledge gap, actually, in identifying the impacts of climate on the different value chains. And actually, when we conducted the study, the only thing that was in my mind was at the time that how the study can help the private sector investments, who is putting a lot of investments on the value chain, because this study was never done before, and try to see if we can establish a relationship between the climate impact on the value chain, if we can also look at what kind of adaptation measures can be used, and how those adaptation measures can be applied, and what will be the cost of it, and whether the private sector will be able to do it. For the second part, engaging with the private sector, still we have not done it. We have just completed the study. Here. The rationale is, I think, agriculture sector in Nepal has a big contributor to Nepal's GDP, and we know from experience, from the farmers' perspective, that climate change has impacted production through its impact on crop calendar, growing change in the growing season, the storage requirement, and overall land use change, as well as also the cost of the inputs on farm production, cost of harvesting, storage, processing, and production. So all the value chain nodes being impacted by climate change. So that we knew already, and with that knowledge, we went into this study. This was a small conceptual framework that we identified for this study. So we look at climate, and then we look at the different value chain of the different commodities, and then we try to establish a relationship between them in terms of yield, in terms of market value, in terms of trade potentials, and then we see whether it is profitable or not, whether working on climate change and making a prescription to the private sector for their investment really makes sense or not. So this was the whole purpose of this study. The methodology was a bit complicated, but just to simplify it, we have used some modeling approaches. The modeling was done at different level. We did the climate modeling. So climate modeling, we used the global circulation model to produce the climate scenario for the value chain. And we also did the field survey in those areas which are potential for the 5 different commodities of the value chain. But we also did the financial analysis. We also did the socio-economic analysis, and we also estimated the cost of the adaptation measures. And then based on that, we calculated the benefit cost ratio, the internal rate of return, and also the net present value, and trying to see whether this financial analysis really give a sense for the private sector to invest or to continue investing in the selected value chain. Sorry. You can see this is the spread of the field work that we did. And we have selected 5 value chains: the apple, avocado, banana, cardamom, and timur. Timur is a small herb, comes under the xanthoxylum genus, which has a great medicinal as well as daily use in the kitchen of Nepal. And all these products, Nepal is using it. Farmers are using it. It has also a lot of trade potentials. So you can see we did the value chain analysis from the high mountain region to the lower midlands, as well as in the flatlands in the Tarai. Banana is basically in the flatland, cardamom, avocado, it is in the eastern part of Nepal, the apple in the western part of Nepal. So it covers, and the timur in the middle. So it covers around of the geographical variation that we have. Selection of the value chain for the study was itself a great challenge. So how to select what basis to use it. So we use the government strategies, agriculture strategy, and national. But we also did an analysis of the niche commodity which has some potential in Nepal, and then we use the Boston matrix business strategy, which we calculated. We estimated the farmers' income and the market demand for value chain. Then some innovative strategic and emerging products, like understanding the consumers' patterns and the import value of trend, and then potential for climate change mitigation and adaptation in terms of crop vulnerability in the value chain functions during production, post-production, harvest, and all that. So based on that, the 5 value chain were selected, 5 commodities were selected. I'm talking about the methodological approach. So we did a special interpolation of the seasonal precipitation and temperature and extreme events. For example, the length of dry spells, the rainy days, pre-monsoon, monsoon. It was estimated based on the data that we had for 1 kilometer grid. We also did estimation of average temperature and precipitation using the global circulation models that were used for climate production. And then the ground truthing was done through the field check. The team had thought of using the impact second model for estimation, but there were some data unavailable, so we changed the approach. We used the regression models that was basically based on the historical climate and crop production yield data, which is very difficult to collect for all the commodities. In some commodities we had, but in other commodities we didn't have. We used the multivariate, the regression models, again using the historical and cross-sectoral data of climate and crop production, combined with major crop production areas and the district where the crops are produced. We also use a partial market model, and also the benefit, also the financial analysis using the different financial methods like benefit cost ratio, internal rate of return, and net present value. So this is where you see, well, this is coming from the field observation, but we can see the impact of climate in terms of how the farmers perceive it. So you can see the apple, which is very much impacted in terms of climate, in terms of input supply, production, post-harvest, and all that. The avocado, as well as the timur, was not much in this ranking. It's a low ranking, but the high ranking is on, particularly on the avocado production. I think we talked about this. And now I'm talking to the results of this analysis. Well, it was done at the different levels, but I just want your attention to look at the impact, which is on the left side of the screen. If you look at the impact for apple, you see that the yield loss is going to be less by 22% because of climate change, and profit loss will be up to 50% because of climate change. So overall benefit cost ratio was about 1.4, which is a fall from 1.59. We also calculated how much it will cost if you really want to adopt to, and we found that 350,000 rupees, Nepali rupees, which is around, I don't know, which is around $3,000 per hectare, $3,000 plus per hectare for compensating the finance required for adapting to climate change. So this way we went for all the value chain. The banana, you can again see the loss predicted is 16% because of climate change, and the profit loss is going to be on 20 to 20.5%. Benefit cost ratio is dropping from 2.45 to 1.92%. And adaptation measures is basically going to cost around 200,000 rupees. That means around $2,000, slightly less than that per hectare on average. And then for large cardamom, the loss is about 25% from climate change. The profit loss is around 35%, and the benefit cost ratio is dropping from 1.6 to 1.4. And then around $3,000 is the cost of the adaptation. And there are different areas of adaptation, and we did an estimation of those areas as well. And based on that, the cost has been calculated. Though it was a bit subjective, but I think that is based on some experiments that was being done in climate adaptation on the farm. For the timur, again, seems to be less impacted compared to other value chain. The impact on yield is around 13%, and overall profit loss is 9%. I must admit here there was a data paucity as well, because it's very difficult to get the yield data and the profit data, particularly for this commodity, because this commodity is normally grown in community forests. The farmers don't grow in their farmland, but it is in the government managed community forest. So collecting the data itself was a challenge. To adapt to climate impacts, it is going to cost around $100,000 per hectare on average. And this is for avocado again. 13.4% is the drop in profit. Overall benefit cost ratio will be impacted, and with a drop from 2.37 to 2.5, and then 200,000. So $2,000 per hectare on average is the cost of adaptation. If you look at the climate change impacts on consumption, production, on trend, so I think this is the analysis is coming out of for all the value chain that we have selected. There has been a loss with the climate impacts on that in terms of consumption, in terms of production, in terms of also the trade potential of it. And you can see it for apple. I think with climate change impact, there is a slight drop in production, but the drop is going to be higher when we compare to when we project it for 2030 scenario. And same applies to other value chain as well.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Perhaps we could wrap up.
Yeah, just give me 2 minutes. I will finish.
Okay.
It. When we were talking about adaptation, so these were the areas where we were thinking of, and based on those, we calculated the cost of adaptation on per hectare basis. This is the sensitivity test we did for all the 5 commodities, but I have put just for the case for apple here. So if you see the benefits cost ratio under normal conditions is high, and then it dropped down with climate change impacts, which goes almost parallel but quite lower, and we see that year 15, I think, and beyond, the loss has been calculated. There are some of the conclusions coming out of this study. Average benefit cost ratio of 5 value chain commodities put together is falling from 1.92 to 1.72. The compensating finance required for 5 value chain on average for technology cost, for inputs to offset the impacts of climate is around 2,000 per hectare on average. We saw that temperature, precipitation, humidity are the key factors which is impacting the value chain, and the impact is on all the nodes. It is on production, it is on processing, it is on marketing, it is on transport throughout. Adaptation options mostly include the climate resilient varieties, the input management, post-harvest loss minimization, transport management, maintaining temperature, moisture conditions, and agro-processing. We also see a co-benefit of it. If we go for a large-scale plantation of those value chains, I think it has a co-potential of providing benefits in terms of building resilience to risk, and also supporting to emission reduction. So this is the last slide, and thank you for your attention. I will be happy to answer if there are any questions. Thank you.